Picture this. It's 6:15 a.m. I'm standing on my family's 40-acre farm in Montana, steam rising from my coffee mug, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. My phone buzzes. This is 911 dispatch. We have a report that you're trespassing on private property and need to vacate immediately. I actually laughed out loud. I mean, what would you do if someone called the cops on you for standing on land your family's owned for 80 years? I pulled out my leather badge wallet. Ma'am, tell whoever called that Deputy Sheriff Ezra Blackwood is exactly where he needs to be. Through my neighbor's McMansion window, I could see Karen Pemberton's face go white as fresh snow. She still had those expensive binoculars pressed to her eyes like some kind of suburban spy. The smell of hay and diesel fuel mixed with the morning mist, and I knew this was about to get interesting. What would you do in my situation? And hey, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I bet some of you have your own HOA horror stories. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. My name's Ezra Blackwood, I'm 45, and after 15 years as a deputy sheriff and a messy divorce last spring, I moved back to the family farm I inherited from my grandfather. 40 acres of pure Montana beauty that's been in our family since 1943, when Grandpa Jeremiah bought it with his GI Bill money after the war. The old barn still smells like machine oil and decades of honest work. The kind of place where I learned to fix tractors at 8 years old and thought I'd grow old in peace. Then they built Willowbrook Estates right next to my property line 5 years ago. 47 McMansions with matching mailboxes and seasonal decorative flags. But most residents were actually great neighbors who loved buying fresh produce from my little farm stand and watching their kids feed Buttercup, my goat. Yes, I named her Buttercup. Don't judge me. But then there was Karen Pemberton. 52 years old with bottle blonde hair that cost more monthly than most car payments, a PhD in art history she mentioned every 5 minutes, and the attitude of someone who confused studying Renaissance paintings with graduating Harvard Law. Her husband Braden owned Pemberton Construction, the company that built Willowbrook, and they lived in the biggest house with a lawn so perfect it probably got more water than my entire vegetable garden. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in June when I heard the click, click, click of expensive heels on gravel. Karen marched across my property line carrying a manila folder thick as a phone book, her overpowering floral perfume making my chickens stop pecking and stare. "Mr. Blackwood," she announced with that condescending tone that makes your teeth itch, "I'm here on official HOA business." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Ma'am, I don't believe I'm part of your HOA." Her laugh sounded like a car trying to start in winter. "Oh, but you are now. When Willowbrook Estates was incorporated, your property was grandfathered into our covenants." She thrust a certified letter at me like a court summons. "You have 30 days to bring this agricultural situation into compliance." The legal jargon made my eyes water, but the demands were crystal clear. Remove the barn, tear down the chicken coop, eliminate the vegetable stand, and relocate all unsightly farm equipment. The kicker? $500 a day in fines if I didn't comply. The taste of morning coffee turned bitter as Karen stood there with arms crossed, wearing the smug smile like she'd just checkmated Bobby Fischer. "Property values in our community depend on maintaining certain aesthetic standards," she continued. But I noticed something interesting. She kept glancing toward my land with this hungry look, like she was measuring it for something bigger than HOA compliance. "Your little hobby farm might seem quaint, but it's costing each of us thousands in resale value." Here's what didn't add up. Most Willowbrook residents actually supported me. They'd stop by the farm stand, let their kids pet Buttercup, and talk about how nice it was having authentic country life next door. But Karen had rallied a small faction who thought my farm was dragging down their suburban paradise, and she'd already threatened lawsuits if the town council didn't enforce her version of community standards. That night, sitting on my porch listening to Buttercup chew grass and watching the last light fade behind the mountains, I realized this wasn't just about HOA rules or aesthetic standards. Karen's eyes when she looked at my 40 acres, her husband's construction company, that hungry expression, this was about power, control, and land that somebody wanted for reasons they weren't sharing yet. The crunch of gravel under her designer heels still echoed in my head, and I had this gut feeling that a woman who'd call 911 on a deputy sheriff standing on his own family land wasn't going to stop with a strongly worded letter. Karen didn't waste any time escalating things. 3 days after delivering her ultimatum, she filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board claiming my farm created a public health hazard due to animal waste and attracted rodents. She organized a petition among Willowbrook residents and managed to get 12 signatures out of 47 homes. Not exactly a groundswell of support, but she posted those signatures on the neighborhood Facebook group like she'd won a landslide election. The photos she shared made my neat, well-maintained farm look like some kind of rural disaster zone, all shot from weird angles that made my chicken coop look like a condemned building. But here's where Karen made her first big mistake. She never actually read the HOA's original incorporation documents. See, 15 years in law enforcement teaches you that most people assume someone else did their homework, and Karen was banking on that assumption. So I drove down to the county courthouse and requested every single document related to Willowbrook Estates formation. The smell of old paper and bureaucratic coffee filled the records office as I spread those yellowed pages across a metal table, remembering something my training sergeant used to say. The devil's always in the details, and lawyers love to hide devils. That's when I found it. Buried in subsection 12C of the original incorporation agreement was a clause stating, "Existing agricultural operations shall be permanently exempt from all aesthetic and operational restrictions." Permanently exempt. Those two beautiful words meant Karen's entire legal case was built on quicksand, and I couldn't wait to watch her sink. I decided to call her bluff about public health hazards by requesting an inspection from the county health department myself. The inspector showed up on a Thursday morning, a no-nonsense woman named Janet who'd been checking farms for 20 years. She walked every inch of my property, tested soil samples, examined the chicken coop with a magnifying glass, and even checked Buttercup's hooves for signs of disease. When she finished, Janet actually laughed. "Mr. Blackwood, this operation exceeds organic certification standards. I've seen million-dollar operations that aren't this clean." The taste of vindication was sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie. While I was building my legal defense, something interesting happened. Karen's husband Braden quietly approached me one evening as I was closing up the farm stand. He looked nervous, kept glancing back toward his house like Karen might be watching. "Ezra," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what would it take for you to sell this place? I'm talking 40% above market value. Cash deal. We handle all the paperwork." 40% above market value. For a property that was supposedly dragging down everyone's home prices, that seemed awfully generous. The pieces started clicking together like shells loading into a shotgun. Something I'd learned during my detective training was that when people's actions don't match their stated motivations, follow the money. This wasn't about aesthetics or property values. Karen and Braden wanted my land for something specific, and they were willing to pay premium prices to get it. "Thanks for the offer," I told Braden, "but this farm isn't for sale at any price." His face fell like he'd been expecting that answer but hoping for a different one. "Look, between you and me, Karen gets these ideas in her head, and once she's committed to something..." He trailed off, but the warning was clear enough. The community reaction was swift and decisive. The local newspaper ran a story with the headline, "Deputies Farm Under HOA Fire," and suddenly I had neighboring farmers stopping by to offer support. 3 Willowbrook families publicly withdrew their signatures from Karen's petition, with one of them posting on Facebook. "We signed before we understood the situation. The Blackwood Farm is exactly what makes this community special." My law enforcement training kicked in full force, and I started treating this like any other criminal investigation. Every interaction with Karen got documented, every conversation recorded. Montana being a one-party consent state was something I'd used in domestic violence cases before, and it applied just as well to HOA harassment. Every piece of correspondence got filed and copied because I'd seen too many cases fall apart over missing paperwork. Karen's response to losing community support was predictable. She got louder and more desperate. She started posting daily updates on social media about the ongoing agricultural crisis in Willowbrook, complete with photos taken through telephoto lenses that made me feel like I was under surveillance. The sound of her heels on my gravel driveway became as regular as morning roosters, and each visit brought new complaints, new threats, new demands that grew more absurd by the day. But something beautiful was happening too. The 3 families who'd withdrawn support started shopping at my farm stand regularly, bringing friends and neighbors who'd never visited before. Word was spreading beyond Willowbrook that there was this local farm where you could get the best tomatoes in the county and watch your kids learn where food actually comes from, all while supporting a deputy sheriff who wasn't backing down from a bully. By the end of that first month, I realized Karen had made a critical tactical error. Instead of keeping this quiet and handling it through backroom deals, she'd made it public. And in a community that valued honesty, hard work, and standing up to bullies, she'd picked the wrong fight with the wrong guy. Karen's desperation was showing, and desperate people make stupid mistakes. 2 weeks after losing her first round, she filed a false police report claiming I had threatened her with violence. I was actually on duty when the call came in, and my sergeant looked at me with that expression cops get when paperwork doesn't make sense. Blackwood, Karen Pemberton says you threatened to deal with her permanently during your last conversation. Care to explain? I pulled out my phone and showed him the body cam footage I'd been recording since this whole mess started. What we saw was Karen doing 90% of the yelling while I stood with arms crossed, asking her politely to leave my property. The closest thing to a threat was me saying I'd deal with this through proper legal channels, which in Karen's panicked mind apparently became a death threat. My sergeant shook his head and filed the complaint in what we call the crazy neighbor folder. The same afternoon brought animal control to my door after Karen reported dangerous livestock threatening public safety. The officer took one look at my 3 chickens pecking peacefully in their coop and Buttercup chewing grass by the fence, then turned to me with that look people get when they realize they've been pranked. She said you had aggressive farm animals. I was expecting something with fangs, not a goat that's trying to make friends with my boot. His official report declared my livestock exceptionally well socialized and posing no threat to public safety. But Karen's masterstroke came next. She started parking her BMW directly across my farm stand entrance during peak hours, claiming she was monitoring traffic safety. The woman complaining about too much traffic was literally creating a traffic jam. My security cameras captured everything. Karen sitting in her luxury car with a clipboard, writing down customers' license plates, like some kind of suburban secret police, and occasionally getting out to lecture families about supporting agricultural nuisances that threaten property values. Here's something I'd learned from 15 years of handling domestic disputes: documentation always beats confrontation. Instead of giving Karen the screaming match she wanted, I filed harassment and obstruction complaints with time-stamped photos and video evidence. Every interaction got recorded, every incident got reported, building a paper trail that would make any prosecutor's job easy. The beauty of Karen's false police report was watching it backfire spectacularly. My fellow deputies started joking about my dangerous farming operation, and the sheriff himself made a point of stopping by to buy tomatoes, loudly commenting on how peaceful and well-managed everything looked. When Karen called dispatch the next week reporting me for aggressively fertilizing at 6 in the morning, they actually put her on hold before politely explaining that farming wasn't a criminal activity. While Karen was busy destroying her own credibility, I was digging deeper into public records, following that nagging feeling about Braden's generous cash offer. What I found in the county planning office made everything crystal clear. Preliminary development sketches for a luxury subdivision expansion that included my 40 acres, filed 6 months before Karen's first complaint. This wasn't random HOA harassment. This was a calculated business strategy to force me off land they needed for their next project. The community response was everything I could have hoped for. When word spread about Karen's blocking tactics, 3 local veterans started volunteering as unofficial customer service representatives, positioning themselves with lawn chairs and coffee thermoses to ensure people could access my driveway. They weren't there to intimidate anyone, just to provide a friendly presence that happened to make Karen extremely uncomfortable. My favorite moment came when Mrs. Patterson from Willowbrook, a retired schoolteacher who didn't suffer fools, walked over to Karen's BMW during one of her surveillance sessions. "Excuse me, dear," she said in that voice teachers use on misbehaving children, "but you're blocking access to the best tomatoes in 3 counties. Either buy something or move along." The look on Karen's face as she realized even her own neighbors were turning against her was worth every minute of harassment I'd endured. The ironic result of Karen's campaign was transforming my quiet farm operation into the county's most popular weekend destination. People drove from neighboring towns specifically to buy vegetables from that deputy sheriff who's standing up to the HOA bullies. What started as Karen trying to destroy my business had turned into the best marketing campaign I could have asked for. But I knew this was just the beginning. Karen's actions were getting more erratic, more desperate, and people with nothing left to lose tend to make even bigger mistakes. The question wasn't whether she'd escalate again. It was how far she'd go before she crossed a line there was no coming back from. The smell of diesel from my tractor mixed with her expensive perfume during our confrontations was becoming as familiar as morning coffee, and I had a feeling both scents would be sticking around for a while. Karen was done playing small ball. By month 3, she'd hired Harrison Kemp, an expensive attorney from the state capitol who charged $500 an hour and specialized in what he politely called property value protection. Their nuclear option was a civil lawsuit claiming my farm had caused $200,000 in diminished property values across Willowbrook Estates, demanding an emergency injunction to shut down all farming operations immediately. The lawsuit was professionally crafted intimidation, designed to bury me in legal costs until I gave up and sold. What Kemp didn't know was that I'd been building my own legal team. My ex-partner Sarah had become a prosecutor and was feeding me intelligence about his firm's tactics. Ezra, she told me over coffee, this guy's pulled the same stunt in 4 counties. He bets on people not being able to afford the fight. But I could afford the fight because I had something better than money. I had documentation and a growing suspicion that this whole mess was bigger than one crazy neighbor. My detective instincts were screaming that Karen's desperation wasn't just about property values, so I started following the money trail the way I'd learned to track down drug dealers. What I found changed everything. Pemberton Construction had used identical harassment tactics against 3 other rural property owners in neighboring counties over the past 5 years. The pattern was always the same. Identify properties adjacent to potential developments, use HOA pressure to force below-market sales, then flip the land to shell companies for massive profits. Every single victim had eventually sold their family land for a fraction of its development value. The district attorney's office was very interested in this pattern. They'd been getting complaints about Pemberton Construction's business practices, but hadn't connected the dots until I walked in with 5 years of documented harassment cases. This isn't just neighbor disputes, the DA told me, spreading my research across her conference table. This is systematic fraud with a paper trail. While I was building a criminal case, Karen was building her own downfall. Her behavior had become increasingly unhinged. Midnight property line inspections, photographing my customers' license plates, and filing complaints about everything from excessive chicken noise to threatening vegetable arrangements. The woman was documenting her own harassment campaign and didn't realize it. Her biggest mistake came when she tried to bribe County Building Inspector Bob Martinez to condemn my barn as structurally unsafe. Bob had inspected that barn twice in 5 years and knew it was solid, so when Karen slid an envelope across a coffee shop table, he immediately called the sheriff's department. She offered me $2,000 cash to find violations that don't exist, Bob reported. I've seen some desperate people, but this lady's lost her mind. The bribery attempt was Karen's first provable felony, but my prosecutor friend Sarah convinced me to hold off on arrests. Let her keep digging, Sarah advised. Every move she makes gives us more evidence, and desperate people make bigger mistakes. The community response had grown beyond my wildest expectations. Local veterans organized weekend farm support rallies, bringing families to buy produce and show solidarity against bullying. The County Fair Committee asked me to speak about preserving agricultural heritage in developing communities. 3 neighboring counties contacted me about similar harassment cases, turning my personal fight into a regional movement for rural property rights. But the real game changer came when Karen made her fatal error. Convinced she was about to lose everything, she started spreading rumors that I was dealing drugs from my farm stand and filed false police reports claiming to have witnessed suspicious late-night activities involving unknown vehicles and exchange of packages. She was describing people buying vegetables after work, but her reports were serious enough to trigger a DEA investigation. When federal agents showed up at my farm, they found exactly what they expected: an off-duty deputy sheriff growing organic tomatoes and raising chickens. What they didn't expect was a complete file of evidence showing systematic harassment by a woman who'd now filed false reports with multiple agencies. The lead agent, a no-nonsense woman named Detective Riley, reviewed my documentation and shook her head. "Deputy, you've got enough evidence here for federal fraud charges. This isn't neighbor drama anymore. This is organized criminal activity." That night, sitting on my porch with Buttercup chewing grass nearby, I realized Karen had crossed the line from civil harassment into federal crime territory. The taste of evening air mixed with the scent of ripening tomatoes felt like freedom, because I knew this nightmare was almost over. Karen's expensive lawyer was already distancing himself from her more extreme tactics, and even Braden was making quiet calls about damage control. But Karen was too far gone to recognize defeat. Her final desperate gambit was already forming in her mind, and I could see it in the way she watched my property from her window, like a general planning one last battle she couldn't afford to lose. 3 months into this nightmare, I made the discovery that changed everything. I was in the county law library researching HOA precedents when something nagged at me. Why hadn't Karen's lawyer produced the actual incorporation documents during their lawsuit? Every legitimate organization keeps those papers handy, so I decided to pull Willowbrook Estate's complete filing history myself, requesting every document required by Montana state law. What I found sitting in that dusty government folder made my hands shake. Karen Pemberton had never legally established the HOA, not even close. The manila envelope should have contained incorporation papers filed with the Secretary of State, registration numbers, mandatory insurance bonds, and state-required financial oversight procedures. Instead, I found a handful of neighborhood meeting minutes and a photocopied template downloaded from some website. For 5 years, Karen had been collecting dues and imposing fines through what amounted to a book club with delusions of authority. But the real bombshell came when I subpoenaed the financial records through the DA's office. Every penny of collected HOA money, over $300,000, was sitting in a personal checking account labeled K. Pemberton, Administrator. No separate business entity, no board oversight, no audit procedures. Just Karen's private bank account funded by her neighbor's monthly payments. The bank statements read like evidence in a fraud case. Luxury vacation to Europe charged as HOA conference. BMW payments filed under administrative costs. Their pool renovation billed as community improvement project. Karen had been using HOA money as her personal credit card for half a decade, confident that nobody would ever question her authority long enough to discover she didn't have any. I sat there surrounded by evidence of systematic embezzlement, finally understanding why Karen had fought so desperately against any investigation. This wasn't about property values or suburban aesthetics. This was about protecting a criminal enterprise that had been funding her lifestyle since day one. Every false police report, every harassment campaign, every desperate attempt to destroy my farm had been Karen trying to prevent exactly this moment. The legal implications hit me like a freight train. Operating a fraudulent corporation while collecting money under false pretenses carries federal charges. Wire fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement. Karen was looking at serious prison time. The IRS implications alone could bankrupt her family even without criminal prosecution. Here's the beautiful irony. Every single Willowbrook resident could demand full restitution of every penny they'd ever paid because they'd been victims of an elaborate financial scam. Every fine Karen had collected was fraudulent. Every assessment notice was issued without legal authority. She'd been running a neighborhood protection racket and calling it community management. When I called Sarah at the prosecutor's office, her reaction was everything I'd hoped for. "Ezra, this is Prosecutor Christmas Morning. We've got 5 years of documented fraud with a paper trail that leads straight to Karen's personal bank account. She's been so arrogant about her authority that she never bothered to make it legal." But the revelation also explained Braden's increasing nervousness. He knew his wife was sitting on a financial time bomb that could destroy everything they'd built. The construction business, their political connections, the luxury lifestyle, all of it depended on keeping Karen's fake empire running smoothly and nobody asking too many questions. Now I understood why Karen had escalated so dramatically. Every challenge to her authority threatened to expose the whole fraudulent operation. She couldn't back down because backing down meant financial ruin and federal prison. The taste of justice was sweet, but I knew this was just the beginning. Karen was about to discover that you can't build a kingdom on lies forever, and when it falls, it takes everything with it. The morning after my discovery, I walked into District Attorney Sarah Hawthorne's office with 5 boxes of evidence and a plan that would turn Karen's world upside down. Sarah spread the financial records across her conference table, shaking her head as she reviewed bank statements showing Karen's personal spending spree funded by neighbor contributions. "Ezra, this isn't just harassment anymore. Your neighbor's been running a criminal enterprise disguised as community management." The charges were adding up like items on a shopping list: embezzlement, fraud, filing false police reports, attempted bribery, and tax evasion. Because Karen had used electronic transfers and mail to collect fraudulent fees, we could add federal wire and mail fraud charges that carried serious prison time. "The beautiful thing," Sarah explained, "is that she documented everything herself. Most criminals try to hide evidence. Karen framed hers and hung it on the wall. But we needed more than charges. We needed a strategy that would expose Karen's crimes publicly while protecting the community she'd been victimizing. That's when I remembered something from my patrol days. Sometimes the best way to catch a criminal is letting them think they're about to win right up until the handcuffs click shut. The technical preparation was straightforward. Montana's one-party consent law meant every recorded conversation with Karen was admissible evidence. The state's corporation fraud statutes required full restitution to victims, and the money was still sitting in Karen's personal account like a smoking gun. Most importantly, because she'd never legally incorporated the HOA, every official action she'd taken over 5 years was fraudulent. I started building community support, but carefully. Judge Patricia Morrison, recently retired and living near Willowbrook, had been watching Karen's antics with professional interest. Ezra, she told me over coffee, I've prosecuted organized crime cases with less documentation than what that woman created. She's been so confident in her authority that she never realized she didn't have any. The veterans who'd been supporting my farm became my evidence team. We organized 5 years of financial records, correspondence, and witness statements, building a case file that would make federal prosecutors smile. My buddy Mike from the sheriff's department helped coordinate with state investigators who'd been tracking similar fraud patterns across Montana. But here's where the strategy got really smart. Instead of arresting Karen immediately, we decided to let her continue digging her own grave. She doesn't know we've discovered the financial fraud, Sarah explained. Every day she operates her fake HOA, she commits fresh crimes. Every threat, every fine, every official document adds more charges to the eventual indictment. The Willowbrook residents were discovering they had rights they'd never known existed. When word spread that they could legally stop paying dues to an unregistered organization, 43 households immediately suspended payments. Better yet, they could demand full restitution of everything they'd paid, money that was still traceable in Karen's personal accounts. The timing had to be perfect. Karen had scheduled what she called a mandatory emergency meeting for all residents, planning to announce new enforcement measures and increased fines. She'd sent official-looking notices threatening legal action against anyone who didn't attend, complete with her fake letterhead and fraudulent authority claims. The irony was delicious. She was committing fresh crimes while planning to accuse me of wrongdoing. I coordinated with local media who'd been following the story. Channel 7's investigative team recognized this as the perfect example of HOA abuse and wanted to document Karen's downfall in real time. If we time this right, reporter Janet Walsh explained, her fake meeting becomes her public confession on live television. The psychological advantage was everything. Karen still believed she was winning. Her expensive lawyer had quietly withdrawn, but she was representing herself with the confidence of someone who thought legal authority came from speaking loudly and carrying official-looking papers. She'd been advertising her meeting as the final solution to the agricultural problem, promising to reveal shocking evidence of my supposed corruption. My final preparations were simple but crucial. I ensured backup deputies would be positioned around the community center, not for security but to prevent Karen from fleeing when reality hit. Detective Riley from the State Fraud Division would be present with federal arrest warrants, and the bank had already frozen Karen's accounts pending investigation. The beautiful trap was that Karen's own desperation had created the perfect scenario. She'd scheduled her fake meeting to demonstrate authority she'd never possessed, planning to threaten people with laws that didn't apply, all while federal investigators documented every fraudulent word. Sometimes justice isn't about getting revenge. It's about giving criminals enough rope to hang themselves. That evening, sitting on my porch with Buttercup grazing nearby, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The smell of ripening tomatoes mixed with the mountain air, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I could see the end approaching. Karen Pemberton was about to learn the hardest lesson of her privileged life. Real authority can't be faked, and stolen money always has to be repaid. Karen's world was collapsing, and desperate people do desperate things. With most Willowbrook residents refusing to pay dues and her authority crumbling, she decided to take direct action against the source of her problems: my farm. The escalation started small but quickly spiraled beyond anything I'd expected from a suburban mom with a PhD in art history. It began with sabotage attempts that were more pathetic than dangerous. My security cameras caught Karen at 2:30 a.m., dressed in dark clothing, trying to damage my irrigation system with a crowbar she clearly didn't know how to use. She spent 20 minutes wrestling with a water valve before giving up and settling for unscrewing caps on my fertilizer containers, dumping organic nutrients randomly around my crops. The irony was perfect. Even her sabotage attempts ended up helping my vegetables grow better. But Karen's desperation led her toward more serious territory. A week later, she attempted to contaminate my organic certification by pouring commercial herbicide near my crop rows, hoping inspectors would find chemical residue and revoke my permits. What she didn't count on was choosing the windiest day of the month for her chemical warfare. Most of the spray blew back onto her own perfect lawn while barely affecting my carefully spaced gardens. My cameras captured her panicked retreat as she realized she'd poisoned her own grass. The real escalation came with a new round of false police reports, but these were more dangerous than her previous complaints. Karen started calling 911 claiming she'd witnessed drug dealing from my farm stand, describing normal vegetable sales as suspicious package exchanges. She filed detailed reports about late-night criminal activities involving unmarked vehicles and large cash transactions, essentially criminalizing families who stopped by after work to buy produce. These false reports triggered a DEA investigation that could have ended my law enforcement career. When federal agents showed up expecting a drug operation and found an off-duty deputy growing tomatoes, they were not amused. Agent Sarah Martinez reviewed Karen's 17 false reports filed with 5 different agencies and shook her head. "Deputy Blackwood, this isn't neighbor harassment anymore. This is systematic obstruction of justice, and we're adding federal charges." Karen's desperation peaked when she tried to bribe County Building Inspector Bob Martinez to condemn my barn as structurally unsafe. She met him at Murphy's Diner, sliding an envelope containing $2,000 across the table while explaining that my barn posed imminent safety risks that needed immediate attention. Bob, a 30-year veteran who'd inspected that barn twice and knew it was solid, immediately reported the attempted bribery. "She wanted me to fabricate violations," he told my captain. "That's not just corruption. That's asking me to risk lives for her personal vendetta." But the bribery attempt gave us exactly what we needed: a provable felony with witnesses and evidence. Sarah at the DA's office was ready to make arrests, but I convinced her to wait. "She's digging her own grave faster than we can measure it," I argued. "Every desperate move adds years to her sentence." The community was watching Karen's public breakdown with growing alarm. She started confronting my customers directly, screaming about property values, and demanding to know why they were supporting criminal enterprises. When she cornered elderly Mrs. Bennett while the woman was buying tomatoes for her grandchildren, several witnesses called it harassment. Mrs. Bennett, a retired federal employee who dealt with actual criminals, told Karen she was embarrassing herself and everyone who had to live near her. Local businesses began refusing Karen's service after she berated a teenage grocery clerk for stocking my produce. The downtown coffee shop posted a diplomatic sign: "We support all local agricultural businesses and ask customers to treat each other respectfully." Translation: Karen wasn't welcome if she couldn't behave like a civilized human being. Karen's social media presence became a real-time documentation of psychological collapse. Her posts grew increasingly paranoid, describing my peaceful farm as a criminal operation with suspicious activities that threatened community safety. She shared blurry photos taken from her bathroom window, trying to make routine farm work look sinister. The posts were shared widely, but as examples of HOA power corruption rather than support for her cause. The final escalation came when Karen posted on social media calling for concerned citizens to help her conduct surveillance operations to gather evidence of my illegal activities. She suggested people bring cameras and whatever else might be necessary to document the threat my farm posed to community safety. The sheriff's department took this as a potential threat and temporarily confiscated her firearms pending a mental health evaluation. By month 4, Karen had transformed from annoying neighbor to federal criminal, creating enough evidence to prosecute a dozen people. Her desperation had driven her past petty harassment into serious felony territory, all while I sat back and documented every crime. The mountain air tasted like justice as I watched her destroy herself one false report at a time. Karen's final month before her downfall was marked by increasingly desperate moves that showed a woman who knew she was cornered but couldn't stop fighting. With most Willowbrook residents refusing to pay dues and federal investigators asking questions about her finances, she launched what she called her evidence-gathering campaign to prove once and for all that I was the real criminal. Her first move was hiring private investigator Marcus Webb to conduct professional surveillance of my farm operations. Karen offered him $5,000 to find evidence of illegal activities, convinced that a real detective would discover what she'd been claiming all along. Webb took the job, spent 3 days documenting my routine farm work, then called the sheriff's department. "Deputy Blackwood," he told my captain, "this woman hired me to find crimes that don't exist. When I told her your operation was completely legal, she offered another $5,000 to fabricate evidence." The attempted bribery of a licensed investigator was another felony for Karen's growing list, but it also revealed something crucial. She was running out of money. Bank records would later show she'd liquidated her retirement account and borrowed against her home to fund her war against my farm. The woman who'd been living off stolen HOA money was now bankrupting herself, trying to destroy the person who'd exposed her crimes. Karen's desperation led her to more direct action. She started sending certified letters to my regular customers, warning them that purchasing from my farm made them accessories to criminal activity and threatening to report their involvement to law enforcement. The letters were printed on her fake HOA letterhead with official-sounding language about community safety protocols and mandatory reporting requirements. What she didn't realize was that threatening witnesses in a federal investigation constitutes witness intimidation, another felony charge for her growing collection. But the letters backfired completely. Instead of scaring customers away, they brought people together in opposition to Karen's increasingly unhinged behavior. Mrs. Patterson organized what she called a Freedom to Buy Vegetables rally at my farm stand, bringing 30 neighbors to show solidarity. "This woman thinks she can threaten us for shopping where we choose," Mrs. Patterson announced. "Well, I've been buying tomatoes longer than she's been alive, and I'll be damned if some HOA dictator tells me where to spend my money." Karen's next escalation was filing a massive complaint with the state agriculture department, claiming my farm violated organic certification standards and posed environmental hazards. She submitted a 40-page report complete with soil samples she'd illegally collected during her trespassing incidents and photographs from her surveillance activities. The state inspector who reviewed her complaint later called it the most thoroughly documented harassment case disguised as environmental concern he'd encountered in 2 decades. The Agriculture Department investigation cleared my farm of all violations and actually recommended me for the state's Sustainable Agriculture Excellence Award. Karen's stolen soil samples proved my organic methods exceeded required standards. Once again, her own evidence had become my vindication, and the inspector's report would become another exhibit in her eventual prosecution. Realizing official channels weren't working, Karen made her most desperate move yet, attempting to organize neighboring HOAs into what she called a Regional Agricultural Resistance Coalition. She contacted HOA presidents in 3 counties, warning them about the dangerous precedent my farm represented, and urging coordinated action before similar agricultural invasions threatened their communities. Every HOA president she contacted forwarded her communications to law enforcement as evidence of potential conspiracy to harass rural landowners. But while Karen was busy destroying herself through escalating criminal behavior, something beautiful was happening around my farm. Her harassment campaign had inadvertently created a regional movement supporting agricultural rights. Families drove from across Montana to shop at my stand, not just for vegetables, but to support someone who'd stood up to petty tyranny. Veterans, small business owners, and rural families who'd faced their own bullies made my farm a weekend destination. The media attention grew as Karen's behavior became more erratic. Local newspapers started running weekly updates on the HOA farm fight, and Channel 7's investigative team began following Karen's activities as a case study in unchecked neighborhood authority. Their footage of Karen conducting solo surveillance missions from her BMW while screaming at customers became viral content across social media platforms. Karen's expensive attorney finally abandoned ship, citing irreconcilable differences and client behavior incompatible with professional representation. Left to represent herself, she filed increasingly bizarre legal motions demanding emergency injunctions and federal intervention to stop what she called agricultural terrorism in suburban communities. Judge Morrison would later describe her final court filing as legally incoherent and professionally embarrassing. By the end of month 5, Karen had transformed from annoying neighbor to federal criminal while accidentally creating a statewide movement for rural property protection. Her desperation had driven her past the point of no return, creating enough evidence to prosecute multiple felonies. The mountain air carried the scent of approaching justice as her final confrontation with reality approached. The Willowbrook Community Center buzzed with nervous energy as residents filed in for Karen's emergency mandatory meeting. She'd threatened legal action against anyone who didn't attend her final presentation of evidence against my criminal agricultural operation. 80-plus people packed the room. Residents, media, and several unfamiliar faces who'd later reveal themselves as federal investigators. The smell of coffee and tension filled the air as Karen set up her presentation like a prosecutor preparing for the trial of the century. I slipped in wearing full uniform and took a seat in the back, badge catching the fluorescent lights. Karen spotted me and her eyes flashed with what she thought was victory. She'd arranged poster boards covered with photographs, printed charts, and manila folders bulging with what she called irrefutable proof of criminal conspiracy. A hired videographer positioned his camera to capture what Karen believed would be her moment of triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen announced, her voice carrying that familiar condescending tone, "tonight we expose the agricultural terrorism that has infected our community like a cancer. For too long, we've allowed criminal elements to operate under the protection of corrupt law enforcement." For 20 excruciating minutes, Karen presented her evidence with the confidence of someone who'd lost touch with reality. She displayed blurry photographs of families buying tomatoes, claiming they showed drug transactions with coded hand signals. She played audio recordings of normal farm stand conversations, insisting they contained criminal communications in agricultural code language. She waved bank statements showing my legitimate farm income as proof of money laundering through illegal agricultural sales. The audience grew increasingly uncomfortable as Karen's presentation revealed the depth of her surveillance and obsession. Residents exchanged worried glances as they realized their neighbor had been documenting their every visit to my farm stand like some kind of suburban secret police operation. "But here's the smoking gun," Karen declared, reaching her crescendo while pointing directly at me. "Deputy Ezra Blackwood has been using his law enforcement position to protect his criminal enterprise and intimidate honest citizens who dare to speak truth to power. I have documented 17 instances of police corruption and abuse of authority." She turned to face the crowd with theatrical flair. "I call upon this community to make a citizen's arrest of this corrupt deputy sheriff who has betrayed his oath and terrorized our neighborhood." The room fell silent. No one moved. Several residents looked embarrassed for Karen as the weight of her delusions became clear to everyone except herself. That's when I stood up and walked slowly to the front, my boots echoing in the silent room. "Good evening, everyone," I said calmly, my voice carrying the authority of 15 years in law enforcement. "I'm Deputy Sheriff Ezra Blackwood, and I believe Ms. Pemberton has been expecting me." Karen's expression shifted from triumph to confusion as I continued. "Ms. Pemberton, you've just provided an excellent demonstration of why you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, filing false police reports, and operating an illegal organization." I pulled out the arrest warrant, watching her face transform from confusion to horror. "Karen Pemberton, you have the right to remain silent." The room erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs as handcuffs appeared in my hands. "This is impossible," Karen screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "I'm the victim here. I have legal authority. I run this HOA. You can't arrest me." "Actually, ma'am, you never had any legal authority," I replied, securing the handcuffs as Karen struggled against reality. "Your HOA was never legally incorporated. Every fee you collected, every fine you imposed, every official document you issued was fraudulent." Detective Riley from the State Fraud Division stepped forward with federal warrants. "Mrs. Pemberton, you're also under federal arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, and tax evasion totaling over $300,000 stolen from your neighbors." Karen's public breakdown was complete and devastating. She screamed about communist conspiracies and police corruption, while her own videographer captured every moment of her meltdown for posterity. "This is a setup. You're all part of the conspiracy. I was protecting property values." The crowd's reaction was swift and cathartic. Spontaneous applause broke out, with Mrs. Patterson standing to declare, "That woman has terrorized this neighborhood for 5 years. Today, justice finally came home to roost." But the real shock came when Detective Riley addressed the stunned residents. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've all been victims of systematic fraud. Every dollar you paid in HOA dues went into Ms. Pemberton's personal bank account. You're entitled to full restitution plus damages." The taste of justice was sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie as Karen was led away in handcuffs, her cries of innocence echoing through the parking lot. Local news provided live coverage of her perp walk, broadcasting her downfall to households across Montana who'd been following the story. As the community center emptied, residents lingered to shake my hand and share their own stories of Karen's harassment. The mountain air outside smelled like freedom itself. 6 months later, justice tasted even sweeter than I'd imagined. Karen Pemberton received 3 years in federal prison, $400,000 in restitution payments, and 500 hours of community service, specifically working on organic farms to gain appreciation for the agricultural processes she spent years trying to destroy. The judge's poetic justice wasn't lost on anyone, especially when Karen's lawyer argued that farm work constituted cruel and unusual punishment. Even the bailiff couldn't suppress a smile. The Willowbrook residents recovered an average of $8,000 each in stolen fees, money that transformed lives in unexpected ways. Families used their restitution for home improvements, children's college funds, and long-delayed vacations. The community formed a legitimate HOA with proper incorporation, transparent finances, and, by unanimous vote, a permanent bylaw protecting agricultural operations. Democracy had finally come to Willowbrook Estates. My farm evolved into something I'd never dreamed possible. What started as a quiet place to heal from my divorce became a thriving community hub that brought urban and rural families together. The farm stand expanded into a cooperative featuring products from neighboring agricultural operations, creating a market that supported multiple local families while giving city folks authentic connections to their food sources. The annual Blackwood Harvest Festival became the county's biggest community event, attracting thousands of visitors who came to learn about sustainable farming, sample local products, and watch their kids discover that vegetables don't magically appear in grocery stores. Our first festival raised $25,000 for agricultural scholarships, helping rural students pursue degrees in sustainable farming and agricultural science. Personal happiness found me in unexpected ways too. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the veterinarian who'd started visiting during the harassment campaign, became my partner in every sense that matters. Her expertise with livestock and infectious laugh transformed both the farm's operations and my daily joy. We're planning a wedding next spring, right here among the apple trees that Karen once wanted destroyed. The legal precedent from our case revolutionized property rights across Montana. The legislature passed the Rural Property Protection Act, requiring HOA transparency, proper incorporation, and agricultural exemptions. 3 other states adopted similar laws after rural advocacy groups used our victory as a blueprint for preventing neighborhood tyranny. Karen's criminal behavior had accidentally protected thousands of farmers she'd never meet, but the most beautiful transformation happened in Willowbrook itself. Without Karen's manufactured drama, neighbors discovered they actually enjoyed each other's company. Property values increased as the community became known for cooperation rather than conflict. Block parties replaced board meetings, shared gardens replaced petty complaints, and collaborative problem-solving replaced authoritarian demands. Even Braden Pemberton rebuilt his reputation through radical transparency and ethical business practices. After publicly apologizing and making restitution to previous harassment victims, he now specializes in farm-friendly developments that preserve rather than eliminate existing agricultural operations. His business thrives by marketing rural charm without destroying rural livelihoods. The Montana Public Television documentary about our case sparked national conversations about HOA reform. Viewer responses led to additional documentaries featuring other harassment victims who'd found courage to fight back after seeing our story. Karen's downfall had launched a movement protecting property owners nationwide from similar abuse. Today, as I write this with buttercup grazing in evening sunlight and the aroma of Sarah's homemade bread drifting from our kitchen, I'm grateful for every minute of Karen's harassment campaign. Her attempts to destroy my peace gave me exactly the life I never knew I wanted: community connections, purposeful work, lasting love, and the satisfaction of standing up to bullying wherever it appears. The mountain air carries scents of ripening harvest and the sounds of children's laughter from families visiting our educational programs. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something beautiful that helps your whole community flourish. Karen taught me that bullies reveal their own weakness through their desperation to control others. But she also taught me that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they refuse to be intimidated by fake authority and fraudulent threats. Now I want to hear from you. What's your HOA horror story? Drop a comment below and share your experiences with neighborhood tyrants who think they can push people around. You might be surprised how many legal rights you actually have and how many people are ready to support your fight for justice. And if you enjoyed watching Karen get exactly what she deserved, make sure to subscribe to Karen Stories for more tales of entitled neighbors getting their comeuppance. Trust me, the California ranch case I'm covering next makes Karen look like a complete amateur at the harassment game.
Thank you for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up against HOA Karens and karma comes a-knocking. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.